Okay, so you've brought us you've brought something really interesting for today's deep dive excerpts from Numbers chapter 15 in the King James Bible. And I think a lot of people when they think about these old texts, they think, okay, well, these are just, old rules, right? A bunch of thou shalt nots, but we're going to dig a little deeper and see what's going on here, see what we can learn, see what kind of surprising insights we can get into how people thought and lived way back then.
Yeah, what's really interesting is what might at first read like just a list of these kind of ancient prescriptions actually reveals a lot about this early community's understanding of how they related to the divine, their ideas about right and wrong, and even just down to like how they remembered their responsibilities and how to live right. So it really is like a window into a very different time, but with echoes I think that we can still kind of recognize today.
Absolutely. So this one chapter we're looking at covers a lot of ground. We've got, the specifics of how to make offerings. We've got how to deal with different kinds of mistakes. I mean, even like what to wear, what their clothes should look like.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, think about that. That's how important this stuff was. They're thinking about like, the right way to live down to the fringes on their garments.
Okay, so let's get into this. Let's start unpacking all of this. And maybe the best place to begin is with the offerings that are described in verses 2 through 21. And the setting here is really important, isn't it? Because these directions are given as the Israelites are about to enter the land of your habitations, as it says.
Yeah, and I think that's really key because this isn't just like some abstract command given out in the wilderness. It's very specifically for when they are going to settle down, establish their lives in this new place.
Yeah.
It marks a shift, a real change in their relationship with God, where expressions of thanks and devotion will take these more kind of like established ritual forms. And you even see that in the sheer variety of offerings mentioned, right? Burnt offerings, sacrifices made for vows or as free will gifts, and then also offerings that are tied to these important festivals.
Yeah, you really get a sense of the scale and the structure of it all.
Absolutely. This is a whole system of ritual expression.
Yeah.
It's not just like a couple of rules.
Yeah.
It's a whole way of relating to the divine.
And speaking of structure and systems, the level of detail when it comes to what goes along with these animal sacrifices is pretty remarkable too. We're talking about this meat offering, which is flour mixed with oil, and a drink offering of wine. And it's not just like, whatever you have on hand. The amounts are so precise.
Right.
So for a lamb, it's a tenth of a deal, which was a dry measure of flour, and then a quarter hin, a liquid measure of both oil and wine. For a ram, it goes up to 2/10 of flour and a third of a hin of oil and wine. And then for a bullock, it's 3/10 of flour and a half hin of both the oil and wine.
Right. It's almost like a really old recipe.
Yeah.
Got to get the measurements just right.
Exactly.
I mean, what I think is so fascinating here isn't just the detail itself, but like what it might tell us about how they saw the world. This meticulousness, the exactness in these offering recipes, it probably reflects a belief that the quality and the exactness of their offerings was directly connected to their relationship with God. It's like every little detail mattered.
Yeah, no cutting corners.
Exactly. It suggests this culture where even seemingly minor details held like this significant spiritual weight. And then you see it again in verse 12, that emphasis on consistency. According to the number that ye shall prepare, so shall ye do to everyone according to their number. It really highlights this importance of sticking to the standards, like bringing the sense of order and regularity to their worship.
Yeah, there's a real emphasis on doing things the right way. And
Yeah.
that leads to something else I found really interesting about these verses. And that is the inclusion of strangers in verses 14 and 15. So it says, one ordinance shall be both for you of the congregation and also for the stranger that sojourneth with you. And that's really powerful when you think about the time period we're talking about here, because a lot of societies back then were very much focused on their own people.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, in a world where like tribal identities were everything, being part of the in-group was everything. This explicit inclusion of foreigners in core religious practices is pretty amazing. It really points to this like surprisingly universalist aspect within their early theology, this whole principle of a shared ordinance, it just demonstrates a remarkable openness.
Yeah.
Like the relationship with God expressed through these rituals wasn't limited to those who were born into the community. You could join in even if you were an outsider. And actually, this idea of welcoming the outsider comes up again and again in their scriptures. It's a recurring theme.
Hmm.
So it's really striking to see it applied here to these fundamental religious practices.
Okay, and then we move on to this heave offering in verses 19 through 21. And this is something that they were to do once they were in the land and eating its bread, the offering of the first of their dough. And it just seems like a really beautiful symbolic act, you know? They're giving that initial produce back to God.
That's acknowledging where their sustenance comes from.
Right.
It's a way of saying, hey, the abundance of this land isn't just because we're good farmers.
Right.
Ultimately, this is a gift and we're grateful. So you get that sense of dependence and gratitude.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's like they're sanctifying their harvest and their daily bread right from the start.
Exactly.
Okay, so moving on now to verses 22 through 29. Things get a little bit trickier because now we're starting to deal with the whole idea of sin and atonement. And specifically, these verses are about unintentional sins. And what's interesting is that the text seems to make a distinction between errors that were kind of just overlooked and commandments that were broken by ignorance. Is there a difference there? I mean, how do we understand that?
Yeah. Well, the key here, I think, is a lack of deliberate intention or full awareness.
Right.
Right. So you've got actions that go against God's commands, but they weren't done defiantly or even a conscious knowledge of transgressing at that moment. So it really suggests, this understanding that humans are fallible. We make mistakes sometimes without meaning to. And that's where this idea of atonement comes in. The process of reconciliation and cleansing from sin. And the idea is to restore that broken relationship with God through these rituals.
And the prescribed offering for when the whole community commits an unintentional sin is pretty serious. It involves a young bullock for a burnt offering, along with those grain and drink offerings we talked about, and then a young goat for a sin offering. It's not messing around.
Right. It really highlights the seriousness with which any transgression, even unintentional ones, were viewed, because it's still disrupted the connection between the community and God. And the role of the priest is really important here, too, because he acts as that designated intermediary through whom forgiveness is sought and granted.
And the fact that it was based on the idea of ignorance, I think really adds another layer to this.
Yeah, definitely. It acknowledges that sometimes we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah. And we see again this principle of equal treatment extended to strangers, even when it comes to unintentional sin. Verse 26 specifically says that forgiveness applies to the stranger that sojourneth among them, seeing all the people were in ignorance. So that idea of inclusivity that we saw before is still in play here.
Yeah, for sure. It reinforces this idea of a unified community under the law, where the same provisions for atonement apply regardless of where someone came from. But then the text makes this interesting distinction between a community sin and the sin of an individual. So as an individual, it requires a female goat, which I guess suggests like this nuanced understanding of collective versus individual responsibility.
That's an interesting observation. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to make sense of, okay, if the whole group does something wrong, is that different than one person does something wrong?
Yeah, and then verse 29 makes it crystal clear. It says, "Ye shall have one law for him that sinneth through ignorance, both for him that is born among the children of Israel, and for the stranger that sojourneth among them." One law.
Right. That really speaks to a foundational principle of fairness and justice within their legal and religious framework. It's like, okay, the consequences for unintentional actions are the same for everybody, underscoring this sense of shared accountability before God.
Okay, so we've been talking about unintentional sins, but now in verses 30 through 36, the tone shifts pretty dramatically because now we're dealing with something called presumptuous sin, which is basically doing something deliberately knowing that it's against God's will. And the language here is much stronger. The soul that doeth aught presumptuously, the same reproacheth the Lord. And the consequence as well, it's equally severe, being cut off from among his people.
Right. And you can really see the critical difference here between a mistake made without knowing and a willful act of defiance. Presumptuous sin is seen as a direct challenge to God's authority. It's rejecting his word.
It's not just breaking a rule. It's more like saying, I don't even care about the rules.
Right, exactly. It's like you're despising the very basis of their agreement with God. And that's why the consequences are so much more serious.
Okay, and then to illustrate this point, they give us this specific story. It's pretty dramatic, too. It's about this man who's gathering sticks on the Sabbath in the wilderness. And, of course, he gets caught, and he's brought before Moses and Aaron and the whole community. But what's interesting is that it's not immediately clear what they're going to do with him. It says, It was not declared what should be done to him.
And I think that uncertainty is really important
Yeah.
because it kind of shows us how seriously they took this situation. It wasn't just a minor slip up with a preset punishment. This was a big deal, violating the Sabbath commandment, and they needed to figure out what to do. The fact that they put him in ward tells us that they knew it was a serious offense, but they needed some clarification on how to respond.
Okay, so they put him in this holding pattern until they could get some divine guidance.
Right, exactly.
And then finally, the Lord's command comes through loud and clear. The man shall be surely put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones without the camp. That's a harsh sentence.
Oh, yeah. And I think it really shows you just how seriously they took deliberate disobedience. It's not just words on a page, it's a story. It's a story meant to show people the consequences of openly defying God's commands. And the fact that the whole community is involved in the stoning, I think that emphasizes their role in upholding divine law. And it shows you just how seriously they viewed this kind of blatant disregard for the Sabbath.
Yeah. It's like a community-wide statement about what they valued and believed in. So we've gone from offerings to unintentional sin to this really intense story about presumptuous sin. And then the chapter kind of takes this sudden turn in verses 37 through 41. We're given this instruction to make fringes on the edges of their garments and to attach a blue cord to them. So what's the connection here? How does this fit to everything else we've been talking about?
Yeah, it might seem like we're switching gears here, but actually I think this is a perfect example of how they saw ritual and everyday life as interconnected. It was all about remembering your agreement with God all the time. So these fringes weren't just like a fashion statement or something. They had a purpose, that ye may look upon it and remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them.
So it's a visual reminder. It's like a way to keep God's laws in mind throughout the day, like wearing your values on your sleeve, literally.
Yeah, exactly. It's a way to make those values visible and present in their lives. And it also says that they shouldn't seek after your own heart and your own eyes. So it's about resisting those impulses and desires.
Like a built-in check and balance system. The fringes are there to help them stay focused on what matters.
Yeah, it's like a constant reminder to not get carried away by your own desires. And the blue cord is interesting too. Blue is often associated with divinity and remembrance. So it's like this multi-layered symbol encouraging mindfulness and obedience.
Okay, so it's not just about looking good, it's about being good. And all of that ultimately leads to the goal, stated in verse 39, that ye may remember and do all my commandments and be holy unto your God. So it always comes back to that relationship with God.
Exactly. And the chapter ends with this really powerful declaration that gets repeated twice. I am the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God. So it's like they're tying everything together. The offerings, the sin, even the fringes on their clothes. It's all connected back to their core identity, their liberation from Egypt and their relationship with God. It's a constant reminder of who they are and whose they are.
So we've really gone on a journey here, haven't we? I mean, this one chapter in Numbers has given us this amazing glimpse into the lives of the ancient Israelites and their understanding of their covenant with God. We've explored the very detailed procedures for offerings and the way they distinguish between unintentional mistakes and deliberate disobedience. We've seen how inclusive some of their laws were, especially regarding outsiders. And we've even talked about the symbolic power of something as simple as fringes on clothing.
Yeah, it's amazing how much you can learn from just one chapter, isn't it? And it makes you wonder, what lasting principles from all of this might still be relevant to us today, even outside of a religious context. Like, how do we as a society differentiate between unintentional errors and deliberate wrongdoing? Do we have our own versions of fringes, those symbols and reminders that shape our actions and our values?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So we want to encourage everyone listening to keep exploring these ideas and to consider the deeper meaning behind these ancient texts. Thank you for bringing this fascinating source to our attention today and for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a real pleasure.
It has. Thank you.